Today's episode is part of a Mediacharge Roundtable event, where Ben sat down with Sohir Maskey from Aleph Alpha. Enjoy the episode.
Yeah, let's start with some noise for Sohir, my gym buddy actually. So usually we go to the gym and just lift weights, so we don't really have much deep talk about AI. Maybe just 5 minutes on average between lifting weights. But Sohir's, I see him quite often, and today we want to talk about actually the limitations of AI. And since you have quite some experience, maybe let's start with a short introduction. How did you come from being born in Nepal to your PhD at TUM and now to Aleph Alpha?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me. Really nice to see some familiar faces and new faces. To the question itself, I was actually born in Nepal. I think most of my friends don't even know that. I was born in Oktoberfest, a quite small city next to the main or capital city. And we moved already when I was a baby to Germany because my father did his PhD himself in Göttingen in chemistry. And I think coming from such a scientific family and also being a migrant, education is one of the highest goods you have. And this is also why I probably chose quite early on to do my studies in mathematics, bachelor's, master's, and then also do a PhD like 3/4 of my family in mathematics. And then I switched to industry because industry has its positives.
What are the positives at the moment? I would say, what are the benefits?
The benefits in industry compared to university, it's probably the resources. I mean, Aleph Alpha has more funding than any resource share. Also,
I think they have more funding than any startup actually in Germany, right?
Yeah, probably. I'm not certain about that one, but it's for sure one of the highly funded startups in Germany.
So for those of you who don't know that, they raised $500 million, which is quite a large amount of money.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone has seen that on his bank account yet. So I don't think there was a bigger funding round in the last years in Germany. So this is really impressive. Okay, so what does Aleph Alpha do at the moment?
Yeah, Aleph Alpha, for those who don't know, it is a German company who works on generative AI, so primarily on large language models. And I think the biggest mission of Aleph Alpha is to build, in some sense, a sovereign AI for companies and businesses. And sovereignty means here that we really want to enable companies and businesses to own their data, to own their IP, and that they are not dependent of any APIs or other language models coming from US, China, or from somewhere else. So you can really decide where you have your models, where you have the data, what you feed this data.
Why is that good?
To be sovereign, I think independence is always a quite good thing because these providers of language models, they have full power, of course, with these language models. They can decide when to turn off these APIs, when to not turn them off, when to increase the prices. And also in general, I think keeping your data private is really important for a lot of our customers, in particular when you have like a government customer or also in general companies which care about their IP.
Okay, so if I speak to ChatGPT to translate this in more human words, it can be that ChatGPT just captures my data and then just uses it for some other reason, or?
I'm not entirely sure about what ChatGPT does, but it for sure trains their model on your data. You probably sometimes see these two responses and then you can choose the better response out of these two. They then use basically this feedback to retrain the models, which makes sense because this is the way how they make their models better. But also in general, these companies are not very well known for caring about the data of your customers or anything else. For example, Anthropic just had a huge 1.5 billion euro lawsuit because they scraped data from the internet, which...
Without having the right to do that?
Without having the right to do that, they settled a law case where they basically scraped all the data from these Russian websites, which we probably all know, where they have copyrighted material. Then you just download it and train on it. And of course,
so these book libraries like Zlib or
Libgen or Zlib,
yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
And then they had to pay basically, I think, 3,000 euros per book. And this is not, I mean, this is a fraction of the books that they actually copied and used to train. So these fees will, of course, be higher. And I mean, we don't do that, which is already, I think, a nice thing.
So how does Aleph Alpha then train their models? Or what's the business model then?
So, I mean, we take different paths. So first of all, there are a lot of very good open source models. I mean, these correspond to these Chinese models, DeepSeek, and so on, which of course have their problems. They are heavily biased and they will never speak negatively, for example, about Chinese history or whatsoever. So one of our big work streams is really to de-bias them so that these models are usable, so make them kind of not follow the biases that they were trained on. And apart from that, we also train our own models, and for this we have data which follows the EU regulations, the European EU Act, and we also, I mean, we don't fully publish the data, but we publish enough details about the data so that it follows these regulations.
Okay, so users can be sure that it's not just some scraped illegal stuff that has been used for the training.
Users can be sure that it's not a scraped illegal
and
use, yeah.
So the benefits for an enterprise client, for example, could you just sum them up in one or two sentences?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, I mentioned at the beginning that Aleph Alpha really cares about companies being sovereign, meaning that you as a company can choose how much data your company leaves. So where do you train your models? How much data do you provide? And so on and so forth. So you have full control about this stuff. Apart from that, we also provide our own models, which are in its general capabilities extremely good and also state of the art. I think which is also super important is that we have fully customizable models. So if you provide us with your data, which I would advise you to do because models get only better if you have really specific company data, then we can give you the tools to also fine-tune, so improve the models with this data on this specific task. So, and in particular here, you can also decide whether this data will ever leave your company, which is, I think, extremely important to a lot of companies.
Okay, I think I get it. So a big company has a lot of data.
Yeah.
They want to work with this data, and then they don't want to work with the American AI companies because they think, well, they trained on bad data, or maybe they don't know on what data they trained.
Yeah.
They don't want to lose any data. They want to be sovereign, so maybe host it on premise or on demand, depending on what's their preference, and they can then just throw in all this data and work with it with probably the latest models.
Yes, exactly. You can do that. I mean, even simpler. We have general chatbots like ChatGPT where you can just use the chat interface, but be sure that your data never leaves your company or your cloud provider or whatever. But if you want, you can also customize it. So as I mentioned, you can click a button and feed your model with the data that is in your company and customize it by that. And you will for sure make your model better with that customization. Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's really interesting since you did a lot of research over the last years at TUM and LMU, sorry, close by.
Yeah.
And now you work in a research department. Just maybe explain us a little bit, how does your daily life look like? You just read books and then think, okay, how can I optimize an algorithm? Or
yeah, that's an extremely good and difficult question. I don't know, I feel like I was asked this question maybe 5 times in my life, or I tried to answer it 5 times in my life, probably last time when I met my girlfriend. And I think I never gave a good answer. But I mean, in more or less technical terms, I do have some models. I kind of try to figure out what the problems with these models are. And then I think about where this problem comes from and try to improve the model. This means that I also have to feed the models with data, evaluate them, and so on and so forth. Maybe even more basic. So I think because this training seems always a bit weird, you can think about it like when you teach a child to play the piano, then you would also, first of all, probably kind of try to understand how good it is already at playing this instrument, right? So you would let him play something, and then maybe it's good, maybe it's not so good, and based on that, you would then give them specific practice, right? This is what we also do. We first evaluate them, see where they fail, because we have some general capabilities that these models should be good at for our customers. And if they're bad at it, we try to improve it. And this really corresponds to how a child practices piano. We give it basically data. With this data, it sees where it fails, how to improve. And then we hope that this data is enough to be better at this specific job or task. And then we test it again.
So then I assume that the main challenge is to get data.
I mean, this is a big challenge, but I would say, first of all, a big challenge is to kind of understand why the models fail at a certain task, because these models are huge models. They have billions of parameters, and you don't really understand how they make the decisions.
Could you maybe briefly explain what a model actually is? Because maybe some don't really understand. Me, I'm not really aware of that.
Yeah, this is a good question. So a model like ChatGPT, it is basically how to say? I mean, maybe when you think back to school, then you have these functions, right? So, for example, you map x to x square, and then this means
like
you map
Pythagoras. Pythagorean theorem.
Yeah, more like polynomials.
Okay, a little bit more complex. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you map some value to another value, right? You map x to x square, and so on and so forth. So you map some input to some output, right? But when you have language, it's a bit more difficult, because what you try to do is really, with some context, for example, my name is Sohir and I am, you try to predict what the next word in this sentence may be. And this is everything you do. So you have some context, my name is Sohir and I am, and you try to predict that the next word is 28 years old, right? And this is what they are trained on. But this basically is the same as minimizing this polynomial. So if you really try to minimize this function x to x square, you can do some algorithms, and you will do the same for this function which predicts the next word, giving the context which are the previous words. I mean, this is very simplified, but it's actually also not that much simplified, because you do the same thing. You map x to x square, and we do this basically in higher dimensions, in very high dimensions, like billions of dimensions.
So theoretically, you could calculate for every word. You could say, okay, what's most likely to be the next word?
Yeah.
And we could then check this and see, okay, 99%, the next word is my name is, and you go from word to word then.
Yeah, exactly. So basically you have this training data, and this training data, it corresponds to trillions of words. And I mean, trillions of words means you have billions of pages of documents on which you train your data. And of course you can do then statistics on this. So basically you can train a model which takes some input and then just predicts the most likely next output, right? And I mean, these large language models are exactly trained on this objective, that you look at your data and you try to predict the next data point. And that's also why they improve so much with more data, and why companies seek for more and more data. The problem with this approach is that the model doesn't really learn to think like we human do, because it more or less only learns to predict the next word based on the statistics of the training data. And of course, because we have so much data, it's still a good model, because I mean, basically everything that you want to know is out there in the internet, and that's why the statistical model is a very helpful model, but not for new tasks or very complex tasks, and that's where the problems come.
But if I interpret this correctly, so Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, he talks a lot about AGI. So maybe you could shortly explain what AGI is.
Yeah. So I mean, AI, I think we all know, is kind of trying to copy the human intelligence, but with computers. So we have some program which gets fed with some data, and then this program is supposed to solve a specific task better than any human can do. And in the last 10 years, we made huge progress. For example, in computer vision, in cars, where you try to read the signs of the car, or more simple, even you try to differentiate a car, a cat from a dog. Models are extremely good at this already. And AGI is now artificial general intelligence, where you don't try to be better at one specific task, but you have actually a model which is better than human at every possible task.
To me, it sounds like that's a complete different product, actually. It doesn't sound like it's connected to statistics that calculate anything with words.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely new paradigm for sure. It really started like 5 years ago with this GPT moment, because one observed that there are certain emerging capabilities. So when you have these huge models trained on billions or trillions of tokens, you could observe that it can do certain things that it was not specifically trained on. So it was trained to predict the next word, but it could also do other things like adding numbers or whatever. And this is the hope of AGI, that it's not only good at these few tasks now, but it can actually solve every possible task.
So what's your interpretation of Sam Altman saying that AGI will be here within the next 5 years?
It I think really depends on how he would define AGI. I think some people would consider also, for example, robotics as a part of AGI, because if we want general intelligence, we should also be able to, I don't know, put dishes in the dishwasher. I'm not a robotics expert, but I'm pretty sure
with a humanoid.
With some robot. I'm not a robotics expert, but I know some robotics expert. I'm pretty sure that we are very far from some robot which will be able to put your dishes in the dishwasher and, I don't know, do something else. So they very much only work in very controlled environments. So let's only focus on a more realistic AGI, which would be language. So you could solve cognitive tasks in a superhuman level. And of course, the last years were crazy. I mean, we made so much progress. But as I mentioned, I still believe that these models are, I mean, we call them statistical parrots. So they basically just give you the output that they saw in the data. And this out of distribution generalization, we call it like that, which means that you don't only solve the task that you had during training, but true intelligence is that you can solve new tasks, right? And these capabilities are very difficult to reach. And I would say 5 years is a stretch. And I'm not even sure whether with our current technology, hardware, software, we can reach that, because right now we are having better statistical parrots. I mean, this is really understating what we have. We have extremely good models which can solve so many problems in high quality, but only problems that were seen during training, but not these new problems which, in my opinion, really tell you whether a system or a human is truly intelligent.
But I think the question is, how many of our daily tasks are new problems? I wouldn't say so many.
Yeah. I mean that's what I mean. You should for sure use these models. You should use large language models. I mean, even the most intelligent people in the world, like Fields Medal winners and Nobel Prize winners, are using these large language models because they increase their productivity. And also for me, who does a lot of programming, a lot of math, of course, it increases your productivity because it can replace a lot of white-collar tasks that you do daily, like repetitive work. It can help me in coding. It can complete code, which is simple. But I think what is really important is that you don't rely or trust these large language models blindly, because there's no, I mean, it's not given that it gives you the correct output. So there should always be a human who works with this large language models, and then it increases productivity and also quality of the output, of course.
So you just mentioned that it can replace white-collar jobs in some parts quite well. So how do you picture the world in 10 years?
In terms of...
In 10 years. When you look at how AI is developing, I think it's obvious that it can take more and more tasks. Mm-hmm. So do you have an opinion on that, or you just don't care at the moment?
Yeah, it's difficult to say. I mean, of course, for me personally, it would be extremely helpful if it could replace most of my repetitive tasks. So sometimes I have to write some summary, or I have to write some, I don't know, one-pager. I think we all know that. And and having some language model or AI which can do this, or even do a PowerPoint presentation or summarize, I don't know, 100 pages of some legal documents, it would be amazing if models can do it. And they can already do this to some certain extent. And I hope in 10 years that it will be able to do it in even more extent, in larger extent, right? That it can replace most of these white-collar repetitive tasks. And I mean, my hope is, to be honest, that it doesn't really replace these cognitive tasks, because I mean, I think I can be cognitive myself, but but rather replace some of the tasks where I don't shine that much, like putting dishes in the dishwater, or
I think they are
cleaning the house.
I think there are quite brutal ideas of how the world can look in 10 years. So some say that it will replace most of the human work, which will probably result in the end of capitalism. But I think that's a very, very, very big shock.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's probably getting exciting. That's the only thing that is for sure. So, if you would advise a company at the moment to work with AI, is there a specific approach where you say, just do it like this, throw all the data in I don't know, a model and see what's coming? Or
I think it really depends on the company. I mean, for me personally, I mean, AI is such a helper and so important that almost everyone should probably use AI in their daily tasks. To write an email, to, I don't know, help you with the calendar or whatever. I also use it for coding and so on. And also to learn things, it helps me so much, because when I want to learn something new, I can have a discussion partner who has very high level. And for companies themselves, I mean, of course, they should provide their employees with AI so that they can also solve these tasks. But you are specifically to have your own data, and this is, I think, a pretty important point, because when companies want to implement AI, I think it's pretty important that they just don't say, "Hey, let's use some AI." But they have a specific use case in their mind. So they want to optimize a specific process. They want some help in, I don't know, summarizing some work process. They want some help in new, when they, I don't know, create new systems. They want to match their new systems with old systems or whatsoever. So they should have some specific use case in mind. They should have some data in mind on which you can evaluate the models for this use case. And then we can talk. I mean, of course, we as a company, Aleph Alpha, help companies with that, but this is extremely important to have a specific use case in mind. If you want that AI helps you more.
It reminds me a little bit of the classic digitalization consulting service. So you basically first pay someone to find a good process that can be automated, and then you automate it, if possible. So it's actually the digitalization 2.0 then, or?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we spent some time in the company to help other companies figure out how they can use AI. So it is for sure some consultancy also involved. But as I mentioned, I think it's a bit broader, because you don't have to have a specific AI trained on specific data to be helpful. It can also be helpful if you have a general purpose chatbot like we provide or others provide, because this already helps you in a lot of repetitive tasks, right?
So if you could solve one critical challenge at the moment for one of these models, what would it be?
I think the biggest problems with these frontier models, so these models from ChatGPT or from OpenAI and Anthropic and so on, the biggest problem is that they still tend to hallucinate a lot. So they give you a...
Why do they hallucinate?
Yeah, I mean, also a good question. I mean, basically they are trained on specific data, right? And if you ask it a question that it was not trained on, it cannot reliably answer this question. It can't even reliably answer the question if it was trained on the data, but on new data even less. And there it tends to give you an output because it was trained to give you an output. So it will not just say, hey, I have no idea. It will just give you some output because it was trained on this task, right? And then it will give you pretty confidently some output. And this hallucination, so hallucination is basically where it gives you some semantically correct sentence as an output, but it's bullshit. So it's basically false facts or whatsoever. And these hallucination rates are even increasing with the new model generation. So GPT-5 hallucinates, for example, more than GPT-4, which is pretty concerning.
Because it was trained on more data? Or?
Yeah, it's not really clear. I mean, they had their technical report and there are some evaluations and there they can see, hey, we hallucinate more than before, and they don't give you a full explanation on that. One possible explanation that they give themselves is that they use agents now. Agents are not only one model, it's a model which can call certain tools. So for example, you can call the web, you can browse in the web, and so on and so forth. So this is what you see in GPT.
It can behave a little bit like a human on the web.
Yeah, exactly. It can be a human on the web, but it can also execute Python programs and so on. And there's a lot of false information in the internet, even on Wikipedia, which it uses a lot. It also uses a lot Reddit and other forums. And these are not the most reliable forums and data sources. So this may also be the reason why they're hallucinating a lot, because human wrote a lot of bullshit into the internet.
So just to give us a better understanding, because I work with ChatGPT literally the whole day, and I know my whole team does. What's the percentage of hallucination at the moment? Just so that or it's probably difficult to say that, but how big is this problem really?
It really depends on the task. So if you have simple question answering tasks or simple summarization tasks and so on, I think that the hallucination rate is pretty low. But when you have a new task, the hallucination rates become much larger. For example, I mean, whenever a model comes out, I give it some complicated mathematical questions, right? And it always hallucinates the shit out of it. So it's telling you something that is just completely wrong. And I think that's basically one trend. So if the query is pretty complicated and needs a lot of reasoning, so thinking, then it may hallucinate more. And if not, like factual information, question answering, it hallucinates less. But the likelihood of hallucination is always there. And you should always double check your output.
So it's actually like a human. If you ask him an easy question, you get a good answer. If it's a tricky question, you probably get a shitty answer.
Yeah, but I mean, some humans say that you don't know the answer, right? So I would say that humans are sometimes better. I mean,
sometimes, yeah. Not always.
Yeah.
Okay, so hallucination is a problem, and you say you can trigger that if you want by just asking a very tricky question, and then it's very likely that you will receive hallucinated answer. So let me just kind of find a scenario where people could do that. I am searching on ChatGPT, hey, I have 5 symptoms and I want to understand what could be a good therapy for me. It's super unlikely that someone ever wrote about these 5 symptoms and this combination somehow makes sense, but I get a result that is then probably hallucinating.
I mean, this is a very specific question. I mean,
I just tried to find something that probably everyone here already did at some point, to search on Google or search on ChatGPT for my neck hurts, what can I do?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't want to shit talk on ChatGPT, to be honest. I think the model is pretty good at these things. Especially in like these medical advices, I heard that ChatGPT is quite good, but I mean, I wouldn't trust it at all. And I mean, in general, I wouldn't trust these frontier models when it comes to such important decisions, like medical decisions or also, I don't know, judicial decision making, without double checking through some human or some other instance. I mean, you can also verify the outputs without a human with formal verification, but I mean, I would take a human. And this specific example, I mean, first of all, probably someone wrote already something about these 5 symptoms in the internet, so maybe it saw it. And if not, it may hallucinate, it may not, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the trickier the question, the more likely you get a hallucination. And for us, the difficult thing would then be to understand, okay, this is a tricky question, I should double check it. So the challenge is that the system is not really detecting that it should tell me, hey, I don't really know that.
Yeah,
Could be a guess, or-
I mean, in some sense, figuring out whether you hallucinate or not is as difficult as giving a good output, given some question, because of course, if the model knew that the output was shit, it wouldn't give the output, right? So in some sense, it is as complex to not hallucinate as giving a good answer, I would say, maybe a bit easier. But yeah, I mean, for a complex question or query, which I also oftentimes ask ChatGPT, I would never trust the output. I would always double check it and make sure that the reasoning steps are correct, and also how bad would it be if the output is incorrect and you just copy and paste it. I think this also you should always have in mind, because I don't know, for some repetitive tasks, I just trust ChatGPT. For example, I just recently wrote a website for myself, and then I just asked it, hey, can you write me a website? And I copy and pasted it, and it was a website. It's nice, it's good. And for these things, I really advise people to use it, because it's a very simple task. If it fails, nothing bad happens, because I can just remove the website from the internet, right? But for tasks where, I don't know, errors have high stakes, I would advise to double check the output.
Okay, but maybe at some point AGI will be super reflected and just tell us, hey, I have no clue of this.
Yeah.
Which would be probably the better answer if the alternative is to get a hallucination.
Mm-hmm. I think some companies with frontier models are working on these features. I think Anthropic or Mistral are working on these features that it reliably tells you that it doesn't know the answer. And I think this is, of course, the ideal output that you have, right? If it doesn't know the answer.
Of course.
Yeah, because then otherwise you spend hours using this answer or falsifying or verifying this answer instead of just seeing, hey, you should turn on your own brain.
Think for a second.
Yeah.
Do you see any risks with AI?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I mean, we just talked about this, right? That, I mean, if you blindly trust these language models, then there are a lot of risks, because you may implement something incorrectly. I've seen so much shitty code on the web, which was obviously written by some large language models, and they are incorrect. They even pretend to be correct, because, I mean, ChatGPT wants to write correct code, but it is so deeply incorrect, and it's so difficult to figure this out because it tries its best to be correct, right? So this is a big problem, hallucination, or in general, that it doesn't give you robust and verifiable answers. The second big problem is probably the cost, right? I mean, all these companies are building, I don't know, power plants even, or a lot of energy, ways to generate energy. And I think this is a quite big problem because it is increasing every day. And I'm not sure how big it is right now, but it's pretty big, maybe.
And actually everyone loses money. As far as I know, there's not a single AI company that currently makes money. So they just build very big power plants and power every GPT and whatever solutions are there. And
yeah, I mean, this is a huge problem. Of course, I mean, OpenAI, Anthropic, all these players are not making any net plus, right? And it's also really mysterious to me how they want to do any net plus, because, I mean, they have their fixed costs. These data centers cost millions, billions of euros. I mean, for example, OpenAI plans to buy 1 million GPUs this year, and the GPU is like 100,000 euros. So
it's like a computer, a very, very strong computer.
A very, very strong computer that you need right now to both train on and do inference, so do the chatting on. And they are extremely expensive. They They consume a lot of energy, and I don't really see right now how you want to change that. So to reduce the cost, you would need some kind of revolution in this hardware, or a software revolution where you can lower the cost underneath these large language models that are deployed right now.
I think there are two directions that I currently see. So one was, I don't know if you know the story of Elon Musk, who built I don't know where it was, in some industrial city in the US. He built a power plant that was gas powered, and I think it was the biggest AI plant that was built so far.
Yeah.
He just built that in a month or something, which is completely, you know the story?
Something around this line.
And on the other hand side, I heard that Apple is currently working on an AI chip that works completely on the phone.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the better solution?
Such an edge device like Apple would of course be nice, but I don't foresee something coming in the near future, in the sense that of course you can have a chip on your phone where you can run large language models, but there's no way that in the near future you can run something like ChatGPT or DeepSeek or whatever on these chips, because these chips simply don't have the memory. These models, they have terabytes, they are huge, and you can't put them on the chip, and you can also not do the forward passes, so you can't generate these queries on these chips right now. And the other path, the problem is to become a big player in the field of artificial intelligence or AGI and large language models, you need some necessary conditions. And one of these necessary conditions is that you have a lot of chips, because without these chips, you can't train the models quick enough. You can train them, but with, 16 chips, you probably need 4 years, and by then there will be a new model.
So that's the reason why you built the big plant, because you can just
exactly.
Very fast.
So basically, we call it parallelization. So I don't know, if you have 50 chips from NVIDIA, probably a model fits on it. Probably you can do these forward passes, you can train on it, but it will take ages, because you can only use one data point at the same time to train it. If you have 1 million of these, you are basically 2,000 times faster than having only fewer of them, right?
Okay, so if we look at the power plants that are now built and all these big server parks, and everyone loses money except for, Aleph Alpha chooses a different approach. You're not building these big constructions, but focus on the models that are existing and also working on own models. But when we look at the industry, the only one who really benefits is actually the consumer. So we don't really pay a lot for that, but it's really powerful.
Yeah.
Is that correct, or am I interpreting it wrong?
I'm not a business guy, but I think that's what startups do, right? They invest a lot of money, make a lot of lose a lot of money, and at some point you have a certain market share, and then you raise the price.
Yeah, hopefully, maybe.
At some point this needs to happen, right? You can't sell this ChatGPT subscriptions at $20 and lose every month $1 billion ad infinitum.
That's what's currently happening. So I think it's beneficial for users at the moment. If ChatGPT wins the race, it's probably good for them. If they lose the race, it was only good for the consumer. But,
it was only good for the consumer right now. But at some point, these companies have to be profitable, right? And they have to make the money. And of course, ChatGPT is taking a lot of shares in the large language models or search market. But at some point, I suppose they will have to change the prices, change certain things. You could already see this with GPT-5, where we had less requests for the reasoning model in the beginning. And then I think it's pretty negative for the consumer, because then you are reliant on these American companies, or ChatGPT in particular, and you can't do anything about that.
We will see. As far as I am informed, there has already been one position in the forecast of OpenAI with advertising revenues for 2026. So my guess would be that OpenAI will just be flushed by advertisement, which would be lovely, of course, because we all do marketing. I'm not sure if every user really appreciates the advertisement, but it could definitely be a game changer. And I think Google is also currently experimenting with that in the US. So we'll see. And then could also be nice to have one of the Aleph Alpha models that are ad-free, actually. So you don't have to watch any ads when you work for your enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it really depends on the customer. I personally don't really want ads when I ask for some factual information, right? Because I want a fact and a true output and not the ad output. But I suppose that a lot of private customers don't really care.
I think it's difficult when when we look at Google 20 years ago, they always communicated we would never do a search engine with advertising because advertising is so annoying. No one would ever do it. And at some point when they had a market share of, I think, 70 or 80%, and they had some proprietary data like Google Earth that time and Google Maps, they started to somehow come up with the idea that advertisement could be a good idea. And I think it was, everyone knows the word. They were never interested in not doing advertising. But we will see. I mean, this will be really interesting. And I think it's a good edge then for Aleph Alpha because you don't want to work with advertising.
Yeah, I'm also curious. I mean, these companies are quite clever, right? I mean, Meta and Google and also OpenAI, and they probably have some specific path in mind how they actually become profitable. So I would also expect that Mark Zuckerberg isn't just randomly spending billions of euros into Scale AI because he hope it kind of will be profitable, but he actually has a path in mind. So I agree with you that, yeah.
We'll see. We'll see. Okay, those were my questions. Do we have any questions? Some? Okay, I see. One of the questions probably a tricky one.
Either it's a correct word or it's a completely wrong word. So how can you?
How do you tell the model what a well-constructed sentence is and what a bad one is?
Kind of train the model in a
Yeah, I mean, this is I mean, it's classical machine learning. You have their classification tasks. So in the example of vision, you could classify an image as being a cat or a dog, and this is a pretty simple task because you only have two classes. In the large language model world, it's a bit more complex because we have a huge vocabulary. So a model like Llama has a vocabulary of 130,000 possible tokens, which are basically words. So what you basically do is you input this sentence, my name is, and then you calculate the loss on the most probable word, which would be some name, with the ground truth. And this is a classification task where you just have 130,000 classes instead of two classes, and then you just calculate a standard. It's called cross entropy loss. So it's just a loss, like you said, L2 loss and so on.
Yeah, but the question is how loss that like.
And how do you find this so-called loss?
Yeah, I mean, this is purely data dependent. So you have your data, you have in your data probably in almost all cases a name, like, I don't know, Sohir or what so on, and then the model sees the data, and then you do something called gradient descent. So you calculate so-called gradients to minimize the function, and this will kind of lead the model towards actually being able to predict a name. But this is a very classical algorithm, stochastic gradient descent. It's also the same way how you would minimize the function x squared. I mean, you can do it simpler, but you can just calculate these gradients and then adapt things. But yeah.
Any other questions?
From me?
Yeah, from you? Okay, let's go.
My question is in terms of training data. So
As more and more data is produced by AI models, how do you improve the training data?
language models. So
So, I mean, as you mentioned, the data is kind of saturated. So all these companies, they train already in all the data that is available. So one of the biggest research questions is how to create more high quality data. And of course, these large language models do not create always high quality data. They hallucinate and so on and so forth. So one big engineering or also research effort is really filtering this data to be of high quality. So there are a lot of methods to do that. You can use the large language models again to filter this data, which of course has again its problem. But yeah, you can use synthetic data. It is used in the newest models. It improves the model if it's high quality synthetic data.
I think this raises another question. So if someone writes a blog article just with ChatGPT, for example, does it really make sense that ChatGPT trains on this blog article again? Or is it just, it can be that there is a hallucination in this article and it then just kind of gets even worse by training on it?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a clear answer, but I mean, it makes sense to train on synthetic data, but maybe not something simple like a blog article. But for example, when you train a model to think, then you oftentimes have this training data which have this thinking traces. So when you ask ChatGPT something, then it reasons, and then you see a long thinking trace, and this thinking trace must be somewhere in the training data, and these are often created by ChatGPT, but always in accordance with the human. So human or some verification system checks whether the thinking trace makes sense, and then you can use it, and it improves the thinking and reasoning by a lot, but maybe not something like a blog post.
But when you look at the internet, so most of the training, I assume, comes from the internet data, so things that are publicly on the web. And I recently read a study that said that the amount of content that has been produced is really extremely progressively increasing. So when you look at the amount of websites, like 5 years ago, you have like not the domains, I mean all the pages that are available, you now have a very, very, very strong increase because there are a lot of publishers who are like kicking out content and content and content. And if 80 or 90% of this content is AI generated, then at some point you're training, let's say your training 5 years ago was on human generation, now it's 50-50, and maybe in 5 years it's you train 90% on AI generated content. So isn't that at some point a problem?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, to understand that, I mean, there are certain phases in the training. So you have this pre-training phase where you train on this simple objective of predicting the next token. And for this phase, you use some trillion tokens of internet data, and you could also feed in these AI-generated documents. And maybe it's problematic, but right now I think it is not. But after this phase, there come the, let's say, extremely important phases where you have to have really high quality data. These are like the fine-tuning phases where you have questions and answers, for example. So only after that, it's actually able to answer your questions. And there you have to make sure that it's high quality data, complex questions, complex queries with reasoning trace and so on. And because this data is so important, researchers and industry care, of course, a lot to keep it of high quality. So it will hopefully not be infected by this AI-generated data because we make sure it won't.
Okay, so then the result would be if you have a great model and you train it on all data that is 90% web AI generated in 5 years, it can be at some point that it's better to just work with a model that has only books as training.
I don't know, maybe. I mean, high quality data is always important, but I'm not, I mean, I know that bad quality data really makes your model worse, and it's enough to have only 1 or 2% of bad quality data and it can already destroy your model. But I'm not sure how bad it would be if it's AI generated data, because it's not necessarily bad quality data.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, AIs will probably learn from each other at some point.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, they do this already.
How do they do it?
I mean, you create synthetic data, for example. This is one way how you can do it. So basically, you have some very strong model like ChatGPT or DeepSeek, and then it already answers your questions. It, for example, gives you a very good gold answer, and it gives you bad answer, and then you can train the model to always follow the good answer. This is reinforcement learning. But there are also other tricks, something called knowledge distillation, which is, as the name indicates, that you distill knowledge from a very clever model into a less clever, smaller model. This is like when you have one function, which the model is just a function, and another function, then you try to match the outputs of the function. But yeah, there are various
many ways how they can train each other.
Yeah.
It's a nice idea that you think of all some sweet little models training each other.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
So you said you're not a business guy. But,
Which type of companies are approaching Aleph Alpha? With which use cases? And where do you see the limitations of AI today?
Yeah, maybe for the first question, I mean, we are really focusing on certain verticals, so government, finance, and also engineering. So really sectors where data is extremely important, IP is extremely important, and there, I don't know, companies and certain governmental sectors are approaching us to help them to use AI, but in a protective, data protective, and an IP protective manner. And I mean, these are companies or governmental things like the Bundesagentur or Bosch or whatsoever, or the Schwarz Foundation, which is one of our biggest money givers. Investors. And these are, I mean, various kinds of tasks. I don't know in detail. I'm also not sure if I can say.
Maybe where you see some limitations, where the mainstream thinks there's AI coming, but you will see maybe some obstacles in the way. What's actually not true.
Yeah.
From your insights.
What do you mean exactly? So where there are some mainstream tasks that...
Things where AI is bad, actually. Things where AI is not performing.
Probably robotics. I mean, you know, we've been talking about self-driving cars for 10 years and they're not even close to be there. So I would say, I mean, without being an expert in robotics, it's probably robotics. When it comes to language, cognitive tasks, I think AI is going to be pretty successful to complete these repetitive tasks. But also, I don't know what the general opinion is about AI being able to solve math. I think this will take a lot of years to actually be solved because math is complex, and in my opinion, it hallucinates a lot. So, yeah, but I'm not sure what the.
I personally don't really use ChatGPT or any of these tools for mathematics, so I still use my calculator for some basic calculations.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about a different level of math.
I totally get you. I also recently saw an interview with Elon Musk where he described how difficult it is to build a human hand. So he was really fascinated by the fact that it sounded like at XAI they have no chance to build a hand at the moment. So that was what I heard through the lines. Yeah, any other questions?
How does Aleph Alpha build sovereign models if company training data is small and messy?
Yeah, I mean, super good question. I mean, first of all, it's, I think, super important to understand that these few data points are not sufficient to build a good model. So you always start with a pre-trained model. So you always start with a model that has billions of parameters and already saw trillions of words, because then it has already certain general capabilities that you always need. So it needs to produce semantically correct outputs, right? Because this won't be learned by the few samples that a company has. And then you go into a second phase, which is called fine-tuning. So you again let this model observe these new data points, which are hopefully of high quality. And then you can fine-tune this and kind of embed these new capabilities in this general purpose model. So these frontier models are general purpose. They're very good at a lot of tasks, but not very good at very specific tasks. So you have this specific task data, you feed this specific task data into this model, and then what you hope is that it preserves its general capabilities. You can still chat with it, which works out a lot of times, and it's also very good at this very specific task with which you provided the model through the data.
And can it happen that if you ask it a company-specific question, it then gives you a general answer, but that's not what you are, like, how do you tell it this is the border and like don't step outside of it?
It can for sure happen, but if you fine-tune it correctly and long enough, it should not happen, yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a question about the...
Why can the model not be optimized to avoid hallucinations?
I mean, whenever you train a model and the model outputs something, it always gives you a probability that the next word is the correct word. So in some sense, you have these confidence scores for every word, and you could try to use these confidence scores. For example, it will tell you that the next word is with 90% dog, but this is not a real confidence score. So it's just some output that you use as a confidence score. So the score is not very reliable and not very useful. And of course, I mean, it's a totally valid approach to have a second model that you train to verify the answer and kind of ask, hey, is it hallucinating or not? I'm just not aware of whether this is working or not. But I mean, it's a totally valid approach, yeah.
It could be nice to have like a percentage or something that says, you, hey, this is 10% correct.
10.
Okay, that's maybe a good idea to improve these models, but also probably shocking then if you see that everything is not so likely.
Yeah, I think people don't want to see that.
No, you don't really want to. I mean, that has always been the case also on Google. I think primary school teachers already taught their kids that when you have a question and you receive an answer, you should double check the source. You should check who said that. Is it backed by research or is it just...
Yeah.
But this kind of gets lost in most of the AIs at the moment. They don't really show the sources, some, but...
Yeah, I mean, nowadays these agents which have the capabilities to also call tools like websites, and so they're getting better. So when you look at ChatGPT 5, I would say that oftentimes the quotes or the sources it provides are pretty good. But I mean, not in 100% of the time, so...
Any more questions? Yannick?
Maybe for you both, maybe more Ben. How do you see AI impacting marketing?
Oh, that's a nice question. I think that especially digital marketing is currently evolving into a freaking atomic digital war, because you can get creatives freaking fast, you can produce websites freaking fast, you can produce videos freaking fast. So I don't really think it's a question of maybe for those who are not really familiar with marketing topics, you have some benefits if you have a big budget. Let's take Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola produces a really nice Christmas spot, and the spot costs 2 million. But when you look at the share of the spot the cost share compared to the overall budget, they have a budget of, you recently told me there's some billions, I think it was 4 billion per year. So when you look at a budget of 2 million in production cost versus 4 billion advertising, there is no production cost. So this was kind of the backbone of many companies. And of course you also have the backbone to build up the brand, so it's not just the creative, but there are a lot of things that are getting cheaper, faster, more accessible. And I think that maybe it's a little bit too drastic to say it's an atomic war, but it's a war where things are getting really fast, data-driven, and super strategic. Because you can waste money very quick with creatives that look great, but your competitor maybe has a better strategy and outperforms at some point. So my personal, it's actually our business hypothesis, is that the whole marketing will derivate in a very strategic field that is not really actually taking care of these, you call it replaceable white collar tasks. And I think there are a lot of them at the moment. For those of you who care.
I have another question. Sorry, answer?
Yeah.
I have another question to Sohir. So what kind of mathematic tasks would you trust without a doubt and without double checking in ChatGPT 5, for example? And when?
I mean, it really depends, because I think that the everyday user just does some additions, multiplications, subtractions, right? And there's no reason to use ChatGPT for these things, because ChatGPT wasn't trained on that, and it will probably answer it oftentimes correctly, but there's no reason why it should answer it correctly. But of course, there are also other repetitive mathematical tasks where ChatGPT can give you very good Python scripts or other code scripts that it can execute itself or that you can execute. So for these repetitive mathematical tasks, I think it's really helpful to use ChatGPT. And everything more complex, I don't know, if you do some proofs in mathematics or so, I would suggest not to use it, at least beyond, I don't know, first semester. Not even first semester, probably. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Any other question?
What are the benefits for a corporate when investing into their own sovereign AI?
I mean, first of all, I think what's important to understand is that Aleph Alpha has also a general purpose chatbot, which is extremely good. So it can answer questions that everyday users have to the same extent and to the same accuracy. But apart from that, we enable customers to stay sovereign in the sense that they can really decide where they have their data, their model, and so on. So at the end of the day, you don't have to let your data leave the company, and we can also provide custom solutions. So at the end of the day, we don't only ship these general purpose chatbots, but you can also give us data, or a very simple data point, just that it should summarize things very well, and we can give you a custom solution. And apart from that, I think what's pretty cool is we have also explainability. So this basically is a research direction where the large language model doesn't only give you some answer, but it tries to also give you an explanation for the answer. So how did it actually get to this answer? It will, I don't know, give you some sources or mark some passages in the text and tell you, hey, this was the reason why we answered that. And this is, I think, relatively unique in addition to the sovereignty that we provide.
So you just said you can have these models without any data leaving your company. So as an enterprise, you could basically say, I want to have my own ChatGPT. And then it's installed on their own servers, and they can just actually have it without any data losing.
Yeah, as a customer, you can't have your own ChatGPT, but you can have your own large language models, which is an extremely good frontier model that we built, and then you can have it on your own hardware. If you want that, you should have some hardware available, because as I mentioned, these models can be quite big, unless you.
So it's super pricey.
I don't know what is more pricey, but if you have to buy 20 H100 GPUs,
that sounds pricey.
That's relatively pricey, but you don't necessarily need 20 H100 GPUs. If you have a very simple task in mind, like summarization, a smaller model is more than sufficient if we fine-tune that. So it really depends on your needs. But yeah.
So if a company says, well, we don't want to have 20 H100s, I think it's the name, but we want to have our data here in Germany on our own services, it's basically a possibility to have a collaboration with Aleph Alpha. And
sure.
And it's hosted then by Aleph Alpha. Okay.
Yeah, we have one of the biggest GPU clusters in Europe, and you can host your data and models, or only models, we don't need the data, there. But you can also use any cloud provider you want, yeah.
Sounds logical. Vitaly, you had a question?
What is missing for you to advance AI to the next level? Is it just data?
Yeah, it really depends on the perspective. I feel like we're moving quite fast. The models are getting better and better. GPT-4 is like, how old is it? 3 years, and since then we have so much better models. But if you ask me what is missing, probably data. Data is scarce. Not only data. I mean, data is scarce, but you also need to have the compute. Most of the big companies already have the compute. So they are combining these and have, of course, as an output, these frontier models. But it's not sufficient to have these GPUs and data to have very good models, as you saw with the newest Llama generation. I mean, yeah. But probably more high-quality data, even new technologies in hardware, because as I mentioned, GPUs are great for parallelization, but they're extremely costly in terms of energy, but also other factors, and probably also technological advances in software. So these large language models, there's some software, and you should try to figure out a better software in some sense. Yeah.
I have another question. Do you think AI will sooner or later be comparable to electricity? That you just have those power plants where you generate it and then you can just get it like from, I don't know, a cable somewhere? Which is actually what's happening at the moment. We just receive it through a cable and it costs electricity. So
I don't know. I think this question is a bit
too abstract.
Over my head. I mean, they
philosophical.
They for sure use electricity, but I'm not sure whether they will be comparable to.
I mean, I think when electricity was invented, everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, they invented electricity. You need this big machine and this big machine and this big machine, and then you have a light." And at some point, everyone was like, "I need electricity."
Yeah.
I mean, okay. Any other questions? All right. Thanks for here.
Thank you for having me.